particular classwork. Yeah, good one. We had the requirement of creating and manipulating a work list, and this was our approach, that we had an array which was more like a work array, and then different threads would insert multiple elements into it. And then we discussed that if you have fixed k sized chunks to be inserted, you could use multiple atomic increments in which the elements of a particular thread would spread across at different locations. Those need not be contiguous. Alternatively, a thread can increment the counter by k directly using atomic add, and then get a contiguous chunk in which it will fill up the elements outside the critical section. So only the part of the atomic which was checking the value of counter, incrementing it or adding something to it and updating it, that was the only critical section part. The adding of elements can be moved outside the critical section. So this is one good example of identifying where we need synchronization, and how sometimes the way we model computation can ease out the synchronization. As soon as we decided that we don't need to really worry about copying elements, right? The copying of elements is not going to hurt us. There is no coordination required. Then that copying of elements, which is actually a heavy operation, depending upon the value of k, turns out to be helpful. I mean, turns out to be beyond outside the critical section. So let's look at this particular code. I hope the code is visible since I have shared the screen. Can somebody confirm, please?
Yes, sir, it is good.
Okay, great, thanks. So the initial includes and hash define. So hash define n is some large number, right? That is the array or work array that I am defining with value n. Note that these are defined globally. The rest of the declaration is similar to what we do in C, C++, but if I add __ device __ to this variable, then it becomes global in the GPU memory, right? So it is not accessible on the CPU, but it will be accessible on the GPU. I see, but just a minute, let me see. Yeah, so that should be okay. So it is accessible on the GPU. We are also going to look at these different mnemonics like device, global we know, but device, etc. in the next part of the lectures. So let's first talk about, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, sir. So if we use __ device, then is it accessible across all devices? So if we have, say, multiple GPUs, then is it shared across all GPUs, or is it just for one particular?
That's a good question. I have not checked it. I am not sure if it is accessible across all devices. Yeah, I am not sure. Yeah, that's an interesting question. So as far as, okay, so as far as functions are concerned, we can have functions also, and those functions can be marked as device, and those are accessible across all GPUs. But if you have a variable, does that mean that, so definitely it is not that the same variable will be accessible across devices. The only possibility is that, can you, I mean, does the compiler or later the driver make multiple copies of that variable across devices, across multiple GPUs? Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I think that needs to be checked. I'll check that. That's a good question. I have never checked that. All right. Any other concerns here? Okay. So now let's come to main first. So in main, I am using CUDA memset to set the value of, okay, so the WL size is the work list size, which is actually our, let's say, the counter which we want to update. Right. So initially the work list is empty, which means that no thread has inserted anything into it. So I would like to initialize it to 0. So note how it has been done. I am giving WL size as the variable, right? So what do we give as the first argument to CUDA memset or CUDA memcopy when you are doing it from CPU to GPU is the pointer to the memory location, but that memory location should be valid on the GPU, right? So WL size is a variable on the GPU, and therefore its address is going to be valid on the GPU. So although I cannot access WL size on the CPU, right? CUDA memset I am calling from the CPU. Although I cannot access WL size on the CPU, I can access ampersand of WL size as an argument to be given to CUDA memset, right? So this is a little crucial point. In case you have confusion, please ask. So that is assigning WL size equal to 0. Alternative way of doing it is, alternative way of assigning WL size to 0 is, any suggestions? Memcopy, sure. You can have a local variable on CPU and do a CUDA memcopy to WL copy, that is ampersand of WL copy, and that will ensure that there is 0 assigned to it. That is another. Hash define will be a little difficult. So hash define has to still ensure that your assignment is happening on CPU or GPU, right? So therefore, since this WL size is a variable on the GPU, therefore the assignment will become a little tricky. You will have to still get into either memcopy or something else that Krishna Vamsi is suggesting, that you can have a separate kernel call. Let's call it with single thread 1,1, and that can also ensure in that you can directly write WL size equal to 0. And that is also one way of initializing your arguments, your variables. All right. So, okay. So after the initialization of WL size, I am calling a kernel K1, which is essentially inserting, in this case, it is inserting exactly one element per thread, but you can have a loop and you can insert multiple. So then there is a CUDA device synchronize, which is optional here because there is K2 just after that, after which CUDA device synchronize is possibly required. What does K2 do? K2 just prints that the number, prints the value of WL size. That is the number of elements I have inserted should be WL size. And that is decided by, since each thread is using atomic increment on WL size. Therefore, each thread is adding exactly one element into the list. So which means K equal to 1 in this case, and therefore since there are 4 into 64 threads, we have 4 into 64 should be the value of WL size at the end of this kernel execution, right? So that is what we expect out of this. What does K1 do? It has this ID assignment, and then it atomically increments the WL size. So the first thread will get 0. I mean, some thread will get the value of returned by atomic increment to be 0, and it will increment it to 1. Then some other thread will come, it will get the value 1. So it will update work list of 1 equal to its own ID and so on. What work we are adding, I'm just assigning ID to it. That is the thread ID, just for checking. But it could be in general arbitrary set of elements. If you just have two such statements, for example, if I have two such statements, then each thread assigns 2 elements to this work list, just that those need not be contiguous. Although these 2 statements are contiguous, there could be interleaving of different threads. So the first element might get inserted, which is the first atomic increment, and then some other thread inserts its elements, then some other thread inserts its own elements, and then I come back to the first thread, which gets a chance to insert its element, second element. Right? So all of this is possible. Alternatively, you can have a for loop in which you can go on inserting the elements. Right? So this was using only atomic increment, which will work in this case. I'll show you the other code which assigns different number of values of k, right? So in this case, exactly 1 or 2 or k were possible. We'll look at the other code where multiple different number of elements get added by a thread. Any questions on this part so far? All right, so we'll just compile and see if this works. So it finally printed that it has added 4 into 64 elements. So that does mean that the WL size has been increased because of the atomic increments. I'm not checking exactly how the array is, but that can also be checked in the sense that whether the work list contains those 0 to 255 elements. Maybe we can do that too quickly. So this is K3, which should have, let's say, 464 elements. That K3 does this, and then I am printing ID equal, okay, WL of %d equal to %d. So let me print that. So that is ID and work list of ID. Anybody sees any syntax errors, semantics errors with this code? Thankfully, in this case, everything is multipliable by 32, so we don't need that ID is less than n, etc. So that I'm leaving for the mother value. Let me see if that prints. There will be long output. Okay, so there are these different values that get printed, and hopefully it prints all the values. Let me see if that sort works. Okay, so it has not sorted properly, but yeah, and yeah, anyway, it is sorting based on the lexical value of the left hand side, and therefore it's not going to tell us everything about the right hand side. Maybe I should not print the left hand side of equal to, and maybe it will be okay. Then I can sort it. But anyway, assuming that this code works, so this is about the fixed k number of elements being added. So what did we use as far as synchronization was concerned? One was that we used atomic increment. Right? The second one was that when I am initializing the WL size, which is CUDA memset, there is a barrier after it. Right? So CUDA memset finishes, then only K1 starts. And why is that useful? Because K1 actually makes use of WL size. There is WL size reading as well as writing too. So there could be a data race between CUDA memset of WL size and K1. We separate that by a barrier, and then the data race is gone. We separate them in time. Right? As far as K1 and K2 are concerned, there is again a data race, because K1 writes to WL size, whereas K2 is reading from WL size. And however, because of the way kernels are executed, we don't, well, here, this is not required. So K1 and K2 are separated in time, they are executed sequentially, and therefore there is no data race, right? K2 and K3 again have similar problem, because K3 is, sorry, not K2 and K3. Yeah, K2 and K3 do not have any data race between them. K1 and K3 have. But anyway, K2 and K3 are also executed sequentially. So that what this means is that K2 and K3 can actually be executed in parallel as far as data dependencies are concerned. Right? So that is what was the synchronization part. Let's quickly look at atomic work list different.cu. Right? Let's go to, yeah, go ahead.
Sir, I didn't get why we are saying that it will be sorted. We can't guarantee the order of printfs, right?
That is true. No. What I was saying is that is true. I was actually thinking of removing this. And then at least we'll be able to figure out that all the values are there. I just wanted to make sure that all the thread values are there. That was easier to check with a sorted out.
Okay, sir.
Okay. So since we have done that, let me just see if that gives actually 0 to 255. Yeah, so that seems to be possibly giving all the values, which probably means that things are okay. There is some number of elements added to 56. I don't know why we got a different output for that. That needs to be analyzed. But anyway, so this is what it is.
Sir, I think it's because all the output strings have been sorted, and maybe that's the second string coming according to lexical.
Oh, is it? Is it like that?
Not sure, but that's fine.
0 and 1. No, I think it's something wrong. Anyway, that's fine. Yeah, that sorting might be creating some problem. All right. Okay. So we'll move to the second part. Atomic work list different. In which case, let's look at the data structure part first. We again have the WL size, and that is a single counter. And we have a work list which has some n large number of let's say the number of elements, let's say n is the number of threads in this case, but I think that is also not getting used properly. But anyway, elements per thread is another quantity which I am having, which means that the number of elements that each thread is going to insert, and that is probably going to be an upper bound. A particular element, a particular thread might insert different number of elements. We'll see. Okay. But yeah, there is work list of enough size. That's what we want to make sure. Let me go to main first, then we'll come back to the kernels. Again, I initialize WL size to 0, right? And then, okay, the actual kernel comes much later. There is a lot of bookkeeping happening. And then finally, I'm printing the value of values inside the work list using K2. Right, so that K2 now has a large loop which is printing all the values of inside that work list. Okay, so that part is okay. But let's look at what is the initial bookkeeping that is happening here. One is that I need to now initialize the element. So in this case, instead of assigning a thread ID, I'm initializing it with a random number. So I'm generating random numbers and then mod with elements per thread. Okay, so the random number is actually a small random number. So there are repeated. The elements per thread is, I think, 5. So 0 to 4 numbers are getting generated. And those are n in number total. What we do because of that, so hn elements is, I see. Okay, so this is, okay, so this is not the elements that are getting generated. This is the number of elements per thread which we are generating, right? So each thread should have maximum elements per thread number of elements. And therefore I'm generating a random number between 0 and elements per thread minus 1. So that is what that random mod is going to ensure. These many number of elements that I have created for each of these n threads, those are going to get utilized by the thread to then generate the numbers, right? So those numbers could be arbitrary. I am possibly going to assign only the thread ID, but that doesn't matter too much in this case. The n elements is the GPU version of this, which needs to be populated now that I have done random on the CPU. So that copying, so I do a CUDA malloc to n elements, and then copying from hn elements to n elements happens. That is host to device. And then I calculate the number of blocks required, etc. And then K1 gets called with that number of elements, because the threads need to know the number of elements that it needs to insert. Okay, let's come to K1. What does it do? It has an ID, which is our usual identifier. And then now we have the variation that we discussed. Instead of atomic increment, I am going to use atomic add over WL size. And what is the maximum that, and what is the number of elements that I would like the WL size to be increased is decided by the n elements of that particular thread ID. So I add, so different threads are adding different IDs to this WL size, and each one is getting its own index, and its index to n elements of that thread ID. Those many elements are going to be the its own chunk. So then after this atomic add has this critical section. So this part is the critical section. After that, it all happens in parallel. So this for loop is executed in parallel by different threads, but there is no problem with that because they are not accessing the same memory location. So equal to the number of elements that I need to add, I just go ahead and add it to the work list starting from the index. So this is my index, and accordingly I am going to add different elements. What exactly is the element I am adding? That is not randomized here, or that is not populated properly. So I am just adding my own thread ID, which is also useful for me to check in case I print it later. Right. All right. So any questions on this particular code? Okay. So then let's see if this particular code works. Okay, it has printed large amount of data. What is this data? Can somebody tell me?
Sir, aren't they the thread IDs?
Yes, so these are going to be thread IDs. Each thread is going to insert its own thread ID a few number of times, 0 to 5 number of times. For example, thread 0 got the n elements to be 3, and therefore it inserted, it did atomic add with 3, and therefore WL size was increased from whatever was the value to plus 3. That was not from 0 to 3. It could be because this is in any order. In fact, thread 0 got its chance much later, right? And as you can see, probably the warp got its atomics incremented in a similar manner, right? At around the same time or at the same time, and therefore these are happening contiguously, right? So 0 to 31, and then 64 to 96 or 95. And so on. So these warps are executing together, which means that the atomics are getting grouped for a warp together. But yeah, even within the warp, there is a sequentialization. Okay, but we should definitely not rely that thread 0 will get the chance first, then thread 1, then thread 2 within a warp. Although that might be the implementation that is underlying. But since the documentation doesn't say so, we should not rely on this particular thing if you want your code to be portable. It might work on one particular GPU, but it might not work on the other. All right. All right. So this,
sir, there is no 3s and 5s in this list.
There are no 3s and 5s in this. Okay, that's a good question.
So maybe they got 0 because it was mod of n size, the number.
Yes, that is possible. Yes, you are right. That's a good observation. That they could have gotten 0. Yes. Yeah, so there will be gaps in this. Yeah, that's a good observation. Yes, they could have gotten 0. Any other concerns here? Right, so we can expect that this is what is the overall output that gets printed, which are the different numbers printed by different thread IDs. So they have inserted different number of times. 0 was inserted 3 times, 1 was inserted once, 2 was inserted 2 times, 3 was inserted 0 times, and so on. Good. All right. So if there are no further questions, let's move ahead. Okay. So we are going to implement something more. So convolution filters are essentially used in many applications, but primarily in the graphics applications, where you have, let's say, some sort of a grid or two-dimensional image, and you want to apply certain filter to it. So to some extent, we saw it when we were dealing with the texture memory, but we'll formalize it from the context of synchronization that we require here. So what you have is, let's say, a two-dimensional matrix. Each one is having certain values. Those are typically going to be double values or floating point values. In our case, we'll take the example of integers because that suffices for our purpose. What you are going to do is to apply a filter onto it. What is this filter? Filter is another, let's say, sequence of some floating, and those need to be applied. So think about a filter as a lens. I'm going to look at a particular part of the image with a lens, and that part is going to get modified. The way it gets modified is going to be decided by how that lens is or how that filter is. So if I have a lens which is going to blur the image, rest of the image remains the same, only the part to which I'm applying this lens, that is going to get blurred. Or if I want to increase the intensity or hue of a particular part, I can apply this filter and change that. Right? So it turns out that it's not okay. If I want to blur a particular image, or I want to increase the intensity of a pixel, that can be most probably done very nicely, completely in parallel. But that is not the convolution filters are useful for. Convolution filters are useful when you want to do some aggregate information across the different pixels or across the surrounding of each pixel. What that indicates is that you have a filter which is going to be applying a complete aggregate function onto the lens, onto the block of data to which you are applying the filter. And then as you slide the filter across the image, then it gets applied at different places, and accordingly it goes on changing. Now convolution, the way we study in possibly DL, might turn out to be little different than what we are going to look at. But again, our job is not really to worry about what exactly are the mathematical implications of a convolution, but this is more from the perspective of a stencil computation which happens on the GPU, and this is a very specialized form of stencil computation, convolution. So that's what I'm going to explain now. So there is an input contains some data in numeric forms, right? So the integers or floating point values, and from there I'm going to get an output cell, which is in this case a weighted sum of the input data elements and its neighbors. In case of 2D, we can assume that there are 8 neighbors to a pixel. Alternatively, you can have, if it's a single dimensional array, then each pixel has 2 neighbors. But I can increase the neighborhood to k, and I can say that in one dimensional array, I can have k neighbors on this side and k neighbors on the other side, or k by 2 and k by 2 on the 2 sides, etc. The weighted part is the part which is specified as part of the filter, which means that maybe the nearby elements to me are going to affect my value more. As I go further in the neighborhood, then those weights are going to reduce because those are going to affect me a little less, right? So from the image perspective, this makes sense. It can also make sense in some other applications where the spatial locality is involved. And it can be generalized to more than 2 dimensions, right? So we're going to work with a single array, and but you can apply it to 2-dimensional array as well. So 1D convolution and odd filter size, because then the k by 2 turn out to be the same. All right. So let's say that my input is something like this, a simple array using 1 to 8 elements in the increasing order. And if I focus on a particular element, right, I can apply a convolution to it. And let's say my filter is also something very small. It has 5 elements. So 3, 4, 5, 4, 3, right? So that is my convolution filter. The way I'm going to apply it is think about this particular part, right? So there is an association between the elements. So if I am interested in this particular element, then the middle element of the filter, I'm going to correspond or bring in line with that middle element. And then whatever are the other corresponding elements, I'm going to get a weighted sum of that. What do you mean by weighted sum? Is essentially I'm going to take a multiplication of these elements and then sum them up, right? And similarly for here also. What that indicates essentially is that the new value at the value 4, at the position where 4 is, currently the array contains 4 at, let's say, input of 3. Output of 3 is going to be decided by this 4 more, but it is also going to be decided by its neighboring elements, which are these two to some extent, and then again by these two, that is 2 and 6, by a smaller value, right? That's why the convolution values are reducing. So that is what we will do as part of the convolution. And then it doesn't matter if any value which is more than 2 elements apart, then that value doesn't affect the position 4, I mean the value 4 in the output. So the way it is going to give us the output as the multiplication is going to be just 2 into 3, 6, 4 into 5, 20, and so on. And once I have this, I'm going to sum these values up, which is going to be some 76 or something. And that is something which I'm going to replace this 4 with. The rest of the values remain the same, right? This is only for this particular element. We would like to do that for each element, right? So as you would have noticed, there is a small difference between, or there is some difference between the way you study it in DL, but this is our goal, that I want to do a multiplication of elements, then I want to sum them up and then replace the value from the input with this particular sum. So there is a weighted sum which I am calculating based on where I am in the input. So definitely the input definitely the input values are going to tell me or are going to guide what the final output is, and so is the filter values. But filter values are more or less decided by what kind of function that I want to apply, maybe blurring or intensify, etc. But the input values might change, and therefore the output might also change. Okay. Any questions on this basic working of convolution filter? Okay, so if it is clear, I would like you to write down code corresponding to it. I'm going to disable the chat for some time. Please think about how you will implement this particular methodology, and then we'll discuss that further. In case it is not clear. So for example, yeah, so you can, okay, maybe I'll just show you one more run of this with, let's say, 5. So these two are happening in parallel, and that's why that 4 is still not updated. So once I apply 34543 filter there, the corresponding multiplications are going, that is the weights assigned to individual, that is going to give me the 9, 16, 25, that is the multiplication of these two, right? That is going to give me 9, etc. And then I sum these values up, all these 5 values I am going to sum, and that is going to give me 95, so that I am going to replace in the output. And as you can see, the other values, this 76, this 57, and I hope you are able to see the pattern, right, as far as all these values are concerned. The boundary values will not see some of the other values. For example, you can assume that the values here are going to be 0 beyond the boundaries. So before 1 and after 8 are all going to be zeros, and therefore when you apply the weighted sum, those values are going to come to be zeros. But I hope somebody is able to see the pattern, that these are all what? These are all what?
Sir, chat is disabled.
That is disabled. Okay. All right. I have enabled that now. Okay. These are all multiples of 19, right? And where is that 19 coming from? The red underlined ones are the multiples of 19.
The sum of the elements in the filter is 19.
Right. So the filter is giving that value 19, and since the elements are just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, therefore these are turning out to be multiples of that. So that is what we did just now. But yeah, the boundary values will have slightly smaller values. That's all right. This one, and maybe this one. Yeah, I don't know why this did not. Maybe this should have also gotten the value. Yeah, I'm not sure why did it not get it, but anyway. So definitely apart from the last two and the first two values, all the values should be decided by the complete filter. Anyway, so please write down that code, and how we get filter array. The filter array is decided by the application. In this case, I mean, these values are arbitrary, but you can have, for example, ones and zeros in the filter to decide that I'm going to just keep this particular block to be let's say more intensified. Let's say you have some image, and then on your phones you will see that there are different edits that you can do, right? You can change the contrast, you can change the exposure, you can change the hue, you can change the white balance, etc. So that can be decided by using this filter. And these applications like changing the hue, etc., these are all different applications. So these can use different filters which you apply to the same image, and based on that you get a different output. So this needs to be encoded as part of the application. Any other concerns? Why do we multiply with 19? No, it's not that we are multiplying by 19. It's just that because of these values whose sum is turning out to be 19, therefore we see those to be multiples of 19, because these are all increasing values. Therefore we see that effect, but that is not always guaranteed, right? It all depends upon the filter as well as the input values. Any other concerns? So please try writing this code, and if there are any concerns in that, we can discuss. Okay, wow. Shubham has given some code. Is equal to thread ID minus filter size by 2. Okay. Filter index is 0 while filter index less than filter size. Good. Sum plus equal to input of index into filter of filter index. Correct. Filter index plus plus index plus plus. Okay. This seems to be on the right track. And then output of thread ID equal to sum. So I think one of the very important aspects that this code that Shubham has written conveys is that there is no synchronization requirement. Right? Why is that? Because the input array is going to be constant. It's not changing. The output array is, as long as you make sure that each thread is writing to a different memory location, you don't have to worry about the output array. And as far as filter is concerned, that is again going to be common across all threads, but read only. And therefore, there is absolutely no synchronization requirement as far as data race is concerned. As far as functionality is concerned, in the sense that do you require some sort of a barrier after every step, that is also okay. Even if you don't have, even if threads write in different orders, you're okay with that. And therefore, this was just to give you a glimpse of that when you are thinking about an algorithm, think about if you want to do an in-place update or you want to make a copy. Like we talked about that there is a data race when threads are accessing the same memory location. So one way of getting rid of that is to have thread privatization, where you make copies of the variable and threads operate on individual copies. So if you had decided, I mean, in this case, the way I suggested is that the output is different. But let's say you want to make an in-place update, then it creates a problem. Because then one thread might have read the values of the input, the other thread is still not even gotten executed. And therefore, you cannot just go and update the values of those. Maybe you will require some sort of a barrier. Everybody will read it locally, right? Then there is a barrier, and then everybody will write it to the same memory location. So you think about it in that context, and you will realize the simplicity that having an input and output separately is going to give you. Right? I'm just going to quickly show you the code, since I'm anyway sharing the screen. Did I lose connection? There we are. Okay, great. Convolution. Yeah, I'm just going to show you some brief part of this. Let's come to main. So I require an input array, a filter, and the output array, right? And then there is some initial values of the filter that I'm assigning, etc. So leave that apart. There is a lot of bookkeeping. Then I'm initializing, allocating memory, and then copying the values to the filter from CPU to GPU. I'm initializing the input, right? So the input needs to have some values, right? So that I'm initializing using something, and then the main method is convolution. I'm printing the output using 1, 1. Right? The convolution takes input, filter, output, and the size of the filter as the arguments, because the size of the input I'm giving as n, which must be hash defined. So it is available inside that, so that is okay, right? So that is the size of the input. Okay, so here again, so the initial part is our usual bookkeeping, right? So as soon as I do ID greater than equal to n return, therefore I don't need to worry about one more indentation level. So I get rid of that. Then there is another set of end cases that I need to worry about, calculating the values of where I should start, etc. For example, the way Shubham has done, I have also done it in a similar manner, but maybe slightly in a different way. And I also need to take care of the boundary conditions which are being done here, which we can ignore for now. The main part is that I'm going to go over the start and end, and for each of these I'm just going to do sum plus equal to, right? Input into filter, and then output equal to sum. This is exactly the code that Shubham has written. And as you can see, there is absolutely no synchronization requirement, although the classwork is part of the synchronization slide. This is just to make you think about all of these, that some of these operations are actually nicely parallel. And therefore, in several graphics applications as well as in neural networks, you could make use of GPUs with a very high efficiency. That is, you will get large benefit if you try to parallelize your applications which are using convolution or graphics applications, or even other applications where convolution gets used. All right. So I'll come back to the slides. Any questions? Okay. So let's go further on that. The last part that we are going to discuss about synchronization is about barriers. So what do we know about barriers? Well, we know that a barrier is a point in the program where all the threads need to reach before any thread can proceed, right? So in our example, it was more like, okay, all of us, let's say, start from our hostel, right? Let's say Pampa hostel. All of us meet in the department, right? Or maybe all of us start from different hostels, right? All of us meet in the department before all of us start going towards, let's say, Mahabalipuram or something. Then the meeting point is the department, and therefore there is a barrier. No student moves ahead before all the students have reached, right? So because there is a single bus maybe, right? So that is our barrier. End of the kernel by default has an implicit barrier for all the GPU threads, which means that if there are threads which are running on the GPU, let's say 1000 threads, then all the 1000 threads must reach the barrier before the kernel exits. It doesn't happen that 500 threads have finished, so let those 500 threads come to the rescue of the CPU, and CPU can give them some other work and so on. So that doesn't happen. So therefore, that is something which we call as a global barrier. So there is a barrier across all the GPU threads, and that we call as a global barrier. Unfortunately, there is no explicit global barrier supported in CUDA, which is changing over time in the sense that there is a possibility of having global barrier implemented in CUDA sometime soon. But as of now, it is not there to the extent I know. We have already seen that threads within a thread block, that is, let's say 1024 threads within a thread block, they can synchronize amongst themselves using sync threads. So note that within a thread block, when you have sync threads, this block of threads are going to wait at the sync threads and then go ahead. So if there is S1 before the barrier, before sync threads, then there is S2 after the sync threads. S1 and S2 will never overlap with each other as far as thread blocks are concerned. I mean, as far as threads within a block are concerned. But if you take two threads from two different thread blocks, then they can execute in parallel, and therefore S1 of one thread block might execute in parallel to S2 of the other thread block, or vice versa. And therefore, sync threads can be a little misleading sometimes if you have not understood this part, that, oh, I have sync threads in my code, so that means that everybody is going to finish the first part, then only the second part is going to come into play. And that also works out in practice, because when you run it enough number of times, you don't see any problem. Exactly when the TA is evaluating your assignment, then this comes up, right? So you should be clear on that sync threads is only for the threads within a thread block, right? Unless you have a single thread block with which you are launching the kernel, then you can call your sync threads as global barrier, but otherwise not. All right, any questions on this basic part of the barriers? Anything which is not understood? Okay, so what about the barrier within the warp threads? How do you implement that?
Sir, I didn't get the question. Barrier within the warp thread, like, isn't it on a hardware level? They execute in a lockstep fashion, so isn't it implicitly a barrier?
Yes, so that is correct. So we already have a barrier within the warp threads, right? They are executing in SIMD fashion, as Shubham is also mentioning. There is an implicit barrier after every instruction. And therefore there is I mean, assuming that there is no thread divergence, etc. So there is already an implicit barrier after every instruction, and therefore we don't need to worry about barrier issues, or we don't need to explicitly implement a barrier within the warp threads. Okay, so that is also fine. We are toward the end of the class, so we'll worry about this code a little later. Any questions? All right, so we'll stop here. See you tomorrow.